That's a great throwback. We use that video.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to find the one that was the closest one to not being an old version. So, ever met somebody that's a little overhyped?
Yes.
Yep.
What about as hyped as this guy?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
What about,
I got
okay,
some more.
have you ever encountered things or ideas that are overhyped?
Yeah.
So, all right, so I'm gonna, now some of y'all might get mad at me, but I'm gonna show you some things that I think are overhyped. Okay, put the first one on the screen.
Jingle bells,
Christmas.
jingle
Now,
bells.
don't scream. Shh, don't scream. So,
Oh no.
I love Jesus and I love all of that part, but man, everything else about Christmas, it's like, what's the big deal, right? Like, what is the big deal? Like, if I spend money to get you a gift and you spend money to get me a gift, we should have kept our money, got what we wanted, because it's probably more accurate to what we wanted anyway, right? Christmas is overhyped. Some more people might get mad at me. Second one, cane sauce. Pause. I love Canes. Go to Canes every first Sunday of the month. I know you're watching this on YouTube. It's just not my preference, but I love your generosity and I love what you do to support our basketball church. Cane sauce is overhyped. Overhyped.
Ketchup, mayonnaise,
It's grown on me a little bit, okay? Like, I don't just despise it now, but like, offer something else. You know, if there was another sauce, I would get another sauce. All right, sports fans, let's see the next thing that I think are overhyped. Lamar Jackson, Jared Goff, and Jimmy Garoppolo. They wouldn't even find, there's not even a picture like this of Jimmy Garoppolo and the Raiders. Because they don't want to show him on the Raiders, right? He's overhyped. They're all overhyped. Lamar Jackson's okay, but the rest three are overhyped.
So are the Saints.
They're not overhyped. They're just bad. Yeah. Like, we won a game, I'm like, well, we can still go to the Super Bowl.
Did you
Like, I'm
turn
not
to
gonna lie, you know?
LSU?
And then we lose it, I'm like, yeah, this team's hopeless. All right, I'm going to make some of the ladies mad in the room on this one. Next one.
1 second. Little minor glitch.
That one girl dating Travis Kelce is a little overhyped. What's the big deal? I don't care if I'm on the phone with my girlfriend and she's upset. You're overhyped. All right. Overhyped. Hey, I want to tell you a story of a time when I was really hyped, okay? So in 11th grade, I joined the tennis team, and the reason that I joined the tennis team was because I didn't want to go to football practice that day. So me and my buddies decided we could get out of football practice by trying out for tennis. Had no intentions of making the team, but lo and behold, I made the team, right? My parents had told me, if you make the team, you're going to play. Now here's the problem. Tennis is a very classy, like, sport, right? It's a very, like, good job, guys, like, good job. That ain't me, right? I'm spiking it and I'm like, bye, ball, as the ball goes over the fence. And my coach is like, Dylan, you can't do that. I'm like, well, we playing a game and I'm here to win. You know, I love, like, I'm going to be honest, like, we play mixed doubles. And I'll go to my partner and be like, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to hit the ball at the girl every time. That's what we're going to do. Because she can't hit it hard enough back to where I can't spike it. And that's how we played tennis. That's how we did it. Now, when we played some schools, like, they were, like, way better than me. Like, I was like, okay, don't hit it to the girl or the boy. Just try to get it over the net, you know? But this one time, see, Ocean Springs, this is St. Martin, this is where I went to high school. Ocean Springs was a high school. Now, Ocean Springs was like, when you think stereotypical, like, that school's good at tennis, like, that's them. Like, bougie, rich neighborhoods, like, playing tennis in the crib, you know, like not like the crib, like the house. I'm saying, like, literally their crib. Like, they teach them tennis, like, they're holding a racket. The first thing they say is, tennis, right? Like, they're just so good. They had won state 6 years in a row, okay? But this is now we were 6A, so, like, state was a big deal. Like, we're talking, like, a 1,500 student school, right? Like, this is a big deal. They're now 7A. My high school's now 7A, I just found out, which means they're close to 2,000. But anyways, so it's a big deal. They're really good, okay? They're really good. And I didn't know no better. So we get ready, it's Ocean Springs week, and everybody on my team is like, oh yeah, we're gonna lose. This is stupid. And I was so mad. I was like, we are not gonna lose. I was like, you need to hear me when I say this. I said, every time I step on the court, I'm the best player on the court.
Right.
I was like, if I don't have that mindset, I have no business playing. I'm the best player on the court. I challenge anybody that comes at me, and they're like, I'm just telling you, we're gonna lose. I was like, if we're gonna lose, I don't even want to go. Like, I don't even want to play. And they're like, all right, whatever, whatever. I was like, we're not gonna lose. And we go, and I'm like, I'm gonna show you, we're gonna lose. And listen, we got the brakes beat off of us so bad. Like, we got absolutely annihilated. I don't even think we scored a point. It was so bad, right? We got destroyed. And they were right, we lost, right? We were lost. And I probably should have not played. I probably should have not gone. I was a little bit overhyped, all right? I was a little bit overhyped because obviously I wasn't as good as I thought I was. But I learned a lesson that day. See, there's no real substance when it comes to hype. Hype is not really a thing. It doesn't change the truth about something. If you think about it, all hype really does is it gives you a better or a worse perception of the reality of what something is. Gives you a better or worse. Just because I think cane sauce is overhyped, it's still cane sauce. It's still what it is. It's not like my hype or my perception of it makes it better or worse. Hype is just something that gives you a different perspective. Now, sometimes hype is a good thing. Sometimes hype can be well used, right? Like if I'm working out, when you go to the gym, you got that guy that's like, me. Anyways, sometimes hype is a good thing because it helps you. I'm that person that's like, if you ever go work out with Pastor, he has like a calm hype. He has and he'll just, I'm like, Pastor, what you doing? And then he'll just lay under 450 pounds and just, and I'm like, man, that's ridiculous, right? So sometimes hype is good, but eventually all hype wears off. That's just the reality. Eventually it all wears off, and all that's left is the truth of the raw substance of what something really is. 2 weeks ago, we talked about this guy named Blind, they call him Blind Bartimaeus. And we're going to read a story. We're going to talk about a story that's very similar to this story, okay? It's very similar. Both of them have a lot of similarities. I'm just going to read it and then we'll talk about it. So you've probably heard this story before. Actually, it was mentioned Sunday night, but it's a common story. It's in John chapter 5, and we're going to read the first 14 verses, okay? So this is what it says. It says, afterwards, Jesus returned to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish holy days. Inside the city, near the sheep gate, was the pool of Bethesda, with 5 covered porches. Crowds of sick people, blind, lame, or paralyzed, lay on the porches. One of the men lying there had been sick for 38 years. When Jesus saw him and knew he had been ill for a long time, he asked him, would you like to get well? I can't, sir, the sick man said, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me. Jesus told him, stand up, pick up your mat, and walk. Instantly, the man was healed. He rolled up his sleeping mat and began walking. But this miracle happened on a Sabbath, so the Jewish leaders objected. They said to the man who was cured, you can't work on the Sabbath. The law doesn't allow you to carry that sleeping mat. But he replied, the man who healed me told me to pick up your mat and walk. Who said such a thing as that? They demanded. The man didn't know, for Jesus had disappeared into the crowd. But afterwards, Jesus found him in the temple and told him, now you are well. So stop sinning, or something even worse may happen to you. So what we have here is we have this guy that had been crippled, had been paralyzed for 38 years. Now, we don't really know if the pool actually healed or whatever. That's not really an important part of the story. But what we do know is that they believed that the pool healed people. They believed that when the waters were stirred, an angel would come down and stir the waters, and if you were the first one into the pool, you would be healed. I don't know if that's actually what happened, but that's what they believed. That was the legend, okay? And so, obviously, a bunch of people believe this because a bunch of people are hanging around this pool. And so what happens is you have this guy that's been there for 38 years, okay? And Jesus walks up on the scene. Ironic that Jesus is at a scene where healing takes place, but he is the healer. Anyways, Jesus walks up on the scene, or where they think healing takes place, I should say. Jesus walks on the scene, he points to the guy, he says, hey, do you want to get well? And he's like, buddy, I can't. There's no one to help me into the pool. Don't you see? I can't get well. He says, take up your mat and walk. And the guy's like, all right, well, guess I'm walking. Gets up his mat, takes it, and walks away, and walks after being paralyzed for 38 years. I see a lot of similarities in this story and the one that we talked about 2 weeks ago. In both stories, what you have is you have a guy that needs healing from Jesus. And in both stories, what you have is you have Jesus asking a question that seems kind of out of place. That seems kind of like, obviously we know the answer to this. He's like, hey, what do you want from me in the first story? And he's like, well, obviously, like, I want to see. He asked the second guy, do you want to get well? He's like, I can't, right? It's a question that seems kind of obvious, but there's some key differences in the story as well. The first difference that I noticed in the two stories is the pursuit. Okay, what do I mean? 2 weeks ago, this is what the pursuit was. It says, when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout. The second week, this week, when Jesus saw him and knew that he had been ill for a long time, he asked him. So what you see in the first story is you see a guy seeking after Jesus. But what you see in this story is a Jesus, or the Jesus, seeking after a guy. Right? The pursuit is different. The second thing that's different is the question asked. Even though Jesus asked a question, the questions are very different. 2 weeks ago, he asked the guy, he said, what do you want from me? This week, he asked the guy, do you want to get well? These are very, very, very different questions. They sound similar, but they're very different. We're going to talk about them in just a few minutes. You may or may not notice the difference. The next thing I notice that's a difference is the response of the guy that needs a healing after the question is asked. 2 weeks ago, when he said, hey, what do you want from me? The guy said, Rabbi, I want to see. This week, Jesus says, do you want to get well? He says, sir, I can't, sir. See, the difference is the expectation in the way that they address Jesus. I want to spend some time talking about these last two differences. These last two differences, both the question that Jesus asked, as well as the response that the guy gave to the question. And what we're going to see is two completely different responses to the presence of God. 2 weeks ago, we saw a guy that fully understood the presence of God. This week, we're going to see a guy that doesn't really understand the presence of God, and we're going to learn some things through it. But I want to start actually with the response. We'll come back to the question, but I want to start with the response. If you remember in the story last week, what we see is a guy that could not see, but what could he do? Remember? He could hear, right? And he heard Jesus coming, and what did he do? He just started shouting like crazy, right? Like, Jesus! And all the other people were like, bro, quiet down, like you're being obnoxious. This just caused him to scream louder. And then Jesus is like, yeah, go get him, right? And he's like, hey, come on, he wants to talk to you. And then Jesus asks him, what do you want from me? And the dude does not hold back. He is straight up. He's like, I want to see. That's what I want from you. I want to see. But what we have in our story today is a completely different response. See, we have a guy who had been crippled for a long time, but Jesus had to get his attention. See, 2 weeks ago, the guy got Jesus' attention, but this week, Jesus has to get his attention. And Jesus asked him if he wanted a healing, but he didn't even answer the question. 2 weeks ago, the guy removed the excuses, but rather this week, the guy embraces the excuses. But what I want to see is I want to get in this guy's head for a moment, okay? So he had been crippled for 38 years, 13,879 days. This guy had been crippled. Let's go back to what some of the first days would have looked like. I'm sure he would have heard about the pool. He would have heard all the hype. He would have heard everybody talking like, hey, did you hear about the pool? Did you hear like, yeah, an angel stirs the water, you jump in it till, like you should go. He's probably hearing all the noise, and he may at first be like, yeah, I don't know if that's true. And then everybody's talking about it, and he's like, okay, I'll go check it out. And I can imagine like what it's like when he first gets there, right? He's probably like awestruck. He's like, wow. And he sees the pool. He's like, that's the pool they're talking about. And like, people are healed in that pool. And like I said, we don't know if healing actually took place, but this is what they believed. And he's probably like, wow, like a healing took place and all this stuff. And he probably sees them getting in the pool. And I can imagine as he gets to the edge of the pool, somebody brings him to the edge, and the waters are stirred. He's like, all right, it's my turn. And someone goes in ahead of him. You know, the first time he's probably excited. He's like, all right, yeah, you got your healing. Okay, that means I'm next. Yes, awesome. And then 2 to 3 times go by, 4 times, 5 times. People are going in ahead of him, and he's starting to get a little discouraged. And then we get to the place where 38 years of him being crippled has passed. Now listen, I don't know if this is how this guy responded to the situation. That's not necessarily what the scripture says, so I'm just making some assumptions here. But here's what I noticed. I noticed that the response the guy gives to Jesus' question says a lot. Let's break it down. See, Jesus asked him, do you want to get well? The first words out of his mouth after Jesus asked him this question is, I can't, sir. Now, a lot of people will talk about this, and they'll talk about all the excuses that he is already embracing, and he didn't even answer the question. He's just giving the excuses. But I find this one word in Scripture of his response that's very interesting. He says, sir. Now, 2 weeks ago, he said, Rabbi. Different guy, different story. The other story, he said, Rabbi, I want to see. This week, the guy says, I can't, sir. He addresses Jesus as sir. Almost as if he perceives this Jesus to be just as common as any of the other guys around him. Like he would have called like he would have been talking to Cohen or Luke or me or Brother Ryan. He says, sir. And I know that seems insignificant, but it really is a big deal. He's treating Jesus, or he perceives Jesus like he's just another ordinary guy. And through this, I have an evaluation question, because here's what I see here. I see the healer stepping on the scene, and a guy that needs a healing not even able to distinguish that the healer's on the scene. And we see this by him saying, sir. And so I'm wondering, is it possible for us to get to a place where we are in the presence of Jesus, but not capable of distinguishing him from any of the other common people? What a dangerous place that's got to be. To be in the presence of Jesus, but think that he's just as common as everybody else. Can we even get to a place where we don't recognize Jesus? Can we get so lost and off track that we tell the healer we can't be healed? See, something happened to this guy, and here's what we have to ask ourselves. Are you able to recognize the presence of God? Are you able to recognize when Jesus steps on the scene? See, I would like to think that we would say that we want to be able to sense God's presence. So what is it about this guy that caused him? Because obviously I don't think that he just was ignorant and just made a bad decision. I think there's something that caused this guy to not be able to recognize that the healer was on the scene. Look at what he says next after he says, I can't, sir. He says, for I have no one to put me into the pool when the water bubbles up. Someone else always gets there ahead of me. See, the guy says, I have no one to help me into the pool. So I have a question. How did he get there in the first place? If he has no one to help him in, how did he get there in the first place? Now, I can make some reasonable assumptions. I can assume that he didn't go to the pool initially when he was well, right? Because this is a place of healing, and it talks about the paralyzed, the lame, hanging out there. Why in the world would he go hang out at the pool if he could walk? So obviously, when he goes to the pool, somebody brought him there. My question is, where's the guy that brought him there in the first place? He has no one to help him in the pool. Maybe if the guy's a good friend, maybe he would have stuck around. I mean, he had enough loyalty to actually bring him to the pool, but did he not have enough loyalty to hang around? Maybe the guy that brought him to the pool wasn't seeing results and decided to go home, or maybe the lame man sent him home. Maybe the guy that was paralyzed said, okay, I appreciate you bringing me here, but obviously we're not seeing results. You can go home now. See, regardless of why he was there and no one was there to help him, here's the truth. At one point, he believed the hype that going to the pool was going to heal him. But he had gotten to a place where things were different. See, he was okay with watching other people go into the pool. He was okay with being around the pool. See, the hype is what got him there, but somewhere along the way, hanging around the pool became enough. Somewhere along the way, the hype was gone, and hanging around the pool became enough. Here's what I'm saying. The hype is what brought him there, but what was keeping him there? The hype hype's what brought him, but what was keeping him? It wasn't the fact that he wanted a healing, because Jesus asked him if he wanted a healing, and he said, I can't. So obviously, he didn't believe that he could be healed. And it wasn't the guy that brought him there, because obviously he wasn't around anymore. See, eventually the hype was gone, and all that was left was the truth about where he really was. And here's the truth about where he was. He was crippled, and he was okay with that. He was crippled, and he was okay with that. What am I saying? Eventually, your hype has to turn to hunger. Eventually, your hype has to turn to hunger. Listen, we're going to have a lot of really awesome things that are going to create hype in this youth group. We're going to have some fun things, and we're going to have pre-service with pizza, games, hanging out with friends, all this fun stuff. We're going to have an awesome service with an awesome worship team and the preaching of the word and a chance to respond. We're going to do some incredible events like Influence Conference and camp and fine arts. The hype is what's going to be there, and the hype can draw you and your friends in for a season, but eventually the hype is going to wear off, and all that's left is the truth about where you really are. And so when the hype wears off, did it lead to hunger, or are you so hung up on the hype that you don't even recognize you're in the presence of a healer? Eventually, your hype has to turn to hunger. But let's look at the questions that Jesus asked. See, I told you these are very different questions. Okay, 2 weeks ago he asked a question. This week he asked a question. Very different questions. What was it 2 weeks ago? He said, what do you want from me? And this week he asked, do you want to get well? What's the difference? 2 weeks ago was an open-ended question. He left room for a wide range of responses. This week was a yes-no question. He only left room for 2 responses. So why did Jesus intentionally put the question this way? Because the way Jesus asked the question reveals the posture of the guy. You see, the guy already pictured Jesus as an ordinary guy. If he would have asked him an open-ended question, the guy would have answered, but he still would have not been exposed to his wrongful position. What if Jesus would have asked him the same question he asked the guy 2 weeks ago? What if he would have said, what do you want from me? I can imagine the guy's response would have been something like this. He would have been laying there, and he would have heard the question, what do you want from me? He would have been like, huh? Oh, yeah. If you don't mind, can you help me in the pool when the water stir? He would have gave the answer. See, the guy would have probably been used to hearing this question. I mean, being there for so long, he probably would have got used to somebody walking by. He's like, hey, is there anything I can do for you? What is it that you need from me? He would have been used to this, and the guy already sees Jesus as an ordinary guy. So if Jesus would have asked this common question that he was used to hearing, he would have gave a common answer and still not have recognized who Jesus was. But Jesus asked a question to reveal to him what he should be thinking and expecting. He says, hey, I'm not going to ask you what you want from me because I know you're going to give the wrong answer. But what I'm going to ask is, do you want to get well? And this forces the guy to think about him getting well. And I can imagine this question, the way Jesus worded the question, creates this connection and dialogue between him and Jesus. I can imagine the frustration. I can imagine him saying, I can't, sir, and turning and looking at Jesus because something happened between Jesus asking the question, him giving the answer, and then Jesus responding to the guy's answer. Because what we see is we see a guy boldly proclaiming in the presence of a healer, I cannot be healed. Then Jesus says one thing, and the dude goes from boldly proclaiming his lack of ability to be healed to boldly standing up after 38 years and walking out. See, something happened between the response of the guy and the response that Jesus gave. And the scripture doesn't give the details, but I can imagine what happens in the moment is the guy gets a glimpse of whose presence he's in. And he realizes, wait a minute, I've been here for 38 years. It's not about the water. Maybe it's about this guy giving me healing. And he says, I can't, sir. Turning and looking at Jesus, Jesus says, you need to get your mat, you need to get up, and you need to walk. And it all of a sudden clicked for him, and it became from, I can't get healed after 38 years to wait a minute, it doesn't matter how long, I'm in the presence of a healer, and he told me to walk. I'm going to get up, and I'm going to walk. Something happened. See, here's what happened. Jesus covered the distance that he couldn't cover. Jesus asked the guy a question of desire, but the guy gave a question of ability. He gave an answer of ability. And somewhere between his answer and the response Jesus gave, something changed. Something changed. See, here's what I believe happened. Jesus needed the guy to see where he was really at before he could see where Jesus was at. He needed the guy to see his wrongful position, his wrongful posture. See, Jesus asked him a question to expose what he should have been expecting and asking for all along. Last week we see, or 2 weeks ago, we see the crazy pursuit of a guy that needs Jesus. This week we see the crazy pursuit of Jesus to a guy that needs him. See, this is what's so awesome about God. He knows where you're at. He knows how far off you've gotten. He knows when you think you've got it all together and you get locked in your function and your mode of doing things and you get complacent and you get stuck in the routine. He knows where you're at, but he loves you enough to cover the distance that you don't even know needs to be covered. And he says, hey, you want to get well? He's showing the guy where he's at. And at the same time, the guy's seeing who Jesus really is. And I can imagine him turning and looking. And the 38-year history disappeared like that. Because he said, it doesn't matter where I've been. It matters who he is. And Jesus covered the distance that he couldn't cover. He knew exactly what question to ask. He knew exactly what the man needed. And he knew exactly what was getting in the way of him seeing the glory of Jesus. Here's what I'm saying tonight. Sometimes we get so settled and deep and stuck in our own faulty approach that we can't even see how far off we've gotten. But God knows exactly where you're at. He knows at exactly what point you started following the hype, even when it faded. He knows at what point you started lowering your expectation and your desire. And here's the coolest thing. He's willing to cover the distance that you can't cover. If you listen to him, he'll expose you to exactly where you're at, and he'll reveal to you what's getting in the way of you seeing his glory. So the question we have to ask ourselves tonight is this. Are you truly still hungry for the presence of God and him to give you what you need? I know that's an easy question. Like, okay, we got to be hungry for God's presence. But no. Like seriously, are you still hungry for God's presence? Are you still hungry for what God has to offer? I love the way Brother Mikey said it Sunday night. He said, look, all that stuff, the gifts, the healing, and all that, that's secondary to the presence of God. Because if you're seeking after that stuff, if you're seeking after being spiritually great, you're missing the point. We've got to seek after God's presence. Are you still hungry for the presence of God? If not, then why are you here? Not in a like you're not welcome or you have bad intentions. That's not what I'm saying, but what's keeping you around? What's keeping you around? Are you here because of the hype? And if so, where will you be when it wears off? I know I've been talking about him a lot tonight. Brother Mikey said something 2 weeks ago. He said, man, I've talked to people about the goodness of God. And I could start listing all of those people that have heard the goodness of God, been exposed to the goodness of God, been exposed to his love, and walked away. Where are they at now? And I can guarantee you, none of them woke up one morning and said, I'm just going to turn away from God today. But somewhere along the way, hanging around the pool became enough. Somewhere along the way, they were okay with being crippled. Somewhere along the way, we've got to be hungry for the presence of God. They were all about the hype, and they didn't let their hype turn to hunger. So here's what we're going to do tonight. I had a whole altar approach that we were praying earlier. In case y'all didn't know, we're in here praying from 4:30 to 5, a bunch of us, for the service and some other things. But I was like, God, where do you want to go tonight? Here's what he said. Because I was like, God, I want them to grasp your presence, and I want them to understand what it means to be hungry. And he was like, you got to teach them. And I was like, well, yeah, that's what we do. I preach, I teach. He's like, no, you got to practice. And I was like, okay. So here's what we're going to do. in just a moment, we're going to stack all these chairs and put them against the wall. And we're just going to create an open space. And we're just going to walk around and we're going to declare what we're believing God for. Now, I know for some of you that's awkward. I know for some of you, you're not extrovert like me. Like, you'd rather just sit and, like, you know, meditate. And all that's fine. All that's great. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. But sometimes we got to pick up our mat and we got to walk. Sometimes we got to be bold. Sometimes we got to declare what we're believing for. Because here's what happens. The enemy's the greatest psychologist that's ever walked this earth. He knows your mind. He knows what makes you tick. He knows how to trip you up. And if you constantly keep everything up here and don't speak it out, when the scripture says your words have the power of life and death, if you constantly keep things here and don't speak it out, you're keeping it on a battleground that the enemy is allowed to play on. But when we declare the promises of God and we declare what we're believing God for, something stirs in our spirit, something rises up, and God begins to pray through us. God begins to move through us, and we're encouraged in the Lord, and we proclaim the power of God and speak it out. So what we're going to do is, as Mr. Brennan, you can start that music. We're going to stack these chairs up. I'm going to give you some direction. What we're going to do, we can start stacking. What we're going to do is, you know, we got a little bit of time here. I'm gonna start, and I'm going to pray over the mic. Now listen, I'm not trying to, you know, I may get a little hyped, but I'm not trying to hype you up. That's not the point of this. The point is not for me to stir something inside of you.